Football is called the beautiful game, not only because the skill, tricks and goals are super entertaining to watch, but also because of the beautiful stories this sport produces. For many, football is a religion because it's offered salvation to fans, institutions, but especially players. In this video today, we'll be sharing some of those salvation stories with you. From near-death experiences to players escaping wars and being witnesses to gruesome murders, these are 8 footballers with surprising backstories you didn't know about. The last one will shock you. Let's start with Darwin Nunez. You know him as the most expensive signing in Liverpool's history, but what you probably don't know is that this flashy superstar lifestyle very nearly never even existed. The striker was born in Artigas, Uruguay, into a very impoverished home. His mother hawked milk bottles, while his dad was a builder. He started playing football early in his life because he had no other hope. And well, at 14 he was scouted and had to move to the capital city all by himself to join Peñarol. You would think it was happy ever after from there, but it wasn't. He was still a kid when he was forced to leave home in search of greener pastures via football. But he suffered from homesickness, which forced him to go back home to be with his family for some time. The following year, he returned to the club, and after some time he suffered the worst injury ever. He tore his ACL. He was just 17 years old at the time and didn't even have a professional contract yet, so it was a real threat to his young career. That injury required 2 surgeries, and he was sidelined for over a year. Following his injury, Darwin's older brother, who's also a footballer, said to him, "You are better suited than me," and went on to quit football permanently. He left football to go look for menial jobs to make ends meet for the family and take care of his brother while he couldn't be on the pitch. Thankfully, Nunez successfully recovered from that injury and eventually earned a move to Europe at the age of 20 when Almeria signed him and brought him to Spain. A year later, Benfica scooped him up, and 2 years after that, Liverpool signed him for a club record transfer fee. And well, the rest, as they say, is history. But if you think this is an emotional story, just wait till you hear what happened to Neymar Jr. But before we get to that, let's first talk about Luka Modric. Oh, and by the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, give it a like and hit the subscribe button to keep updated with more content like this. Your support means the world to us. Yeah, so Modric. This guy is one of the greatest midfielders of his generation, and he's known for putting his little country on the map, leading Croatia to the final of the World Cup for the first time in their history. Modric will go to war for Croatia, that's for sure. But what many people don't know is that he experienced war in his country. The Croatian War of Independence happened between 1991 to 1995, when Modric was about 6 to 10 years old. At some point, the war became so bad that he and his family were forced to run away from their home. Like leaving their home was not bad enough, Luka's grandfather was brutally murdered by Serb rebels. And on top of that, after he and his family ran away, their home was burned to the ground. Because of all this, they could not return home, so Modric and his family lived as refugees for about 7 years, and during this time they had to endure numerous bombs falling on the city. Luka only started playing football in parking lots to take his mind off the war. Thankfully, that little hobby he picked up during that time saved him and made him a national hero. Another player who had a nasty experience with war is Alphonso Davies. His parents are Liberian, but he was born in a refugee camp in Ghana because his parents fled their home country during the Second Liberian Civil War. According to Alphonso's dad, the war was so heated that it was either they picked up guns and joined the war, or they ran. So, of course, they ran. They had 6 kids, and he was not ready to take that risk. In the camp, there was always a struggle for food and clean water. Many days, Davies and his siblings would go to bed without having had anything to eat. But things began to change in 2005 when he and his family moved to Canada. It was there that the little boy picked up an interest in football. But in the beginning, it was very difficult for him. He wanted to play football, but language was a huge barrier. He only spoke broken English at the time, so communication was pretty difficult. Eventually, he was able to blend in, learn the language, become a Canadian citizen, and eventually go on to be a Canadian hero, scoring the country's first ever goal in a Men's World Cup game. Speaking of heroes, Cristiano Ronaldo is one of those guys who you can say is a hero by every single metric. People see the glitz and the glamour, but what many don't know is that he had the most difficult upbringing ever. We'll tell you all about what Ronaldo went through as a kid, but first let us tell you about Neymar's very touching story. Did you know that Neymar very nearly died before he even turned 1 year old? Neymar grew up in a poor neighborhood in Sao Paulo, Brazil. His dad played football, but it was hardly profitable for him. However, when he noticed his son had the gift, he started to push him, working as his advisor from when he was a kid. Luckily, at a very young age, Neymar showed that he was a certified superstar. So, as a child, he became the family's breadwinner. He earned a move to Santos, one of the biggest clubs in Brazil, when he was just 11 years old. And it was with the money he was earning from the club that his family was able to buy their first property. So, yeah, you could say that he was already carrying his parents and sister on his shoulder when he was a literal child. But this is not even the craziest thing about his childhood. The craziest thing is that he very nearly died. One day, when he was just 4 months old, Neymar and his parents were on their way to visit a relative when an onrushing vehicle slammed into them at high speed. The parents were disoriented and scared when they couldn't find Neymar anywhere in the car crash. But the people who came to help them out found 4-month-old Neymar under the car seat, covered in blood and with a shard of glass in his forehead. It was a very scary experience, and Neymar Sr. himself said that he thought that he had lost his son. But thankfully, Neymar survived and went on to become one of the best players and best entertainers the game has ever seen. And Neymar is not even the only former Barcelona player on this list. There's also Zlatan Ibrahimovic. You see, not only was Zlatan born into a life of poverty, but he was born into a life of petty crime. When he was just a child, his parents got divorced, and his mother was later arrested for handling stolen goods. He was staying with his mother at the time, but because of her arrest, Zlatan had to be taken away by social services. After some time, he moved to live with his dad, but the conditions there weren't conducive. There was hardly ever any food to eat, so he was forced to shoplift and steal bikes to survive. It was all of these experiences that forced Zlatan to toughen up and become the hard man we've seen all throughout his career. He found football at a young age, but he very nearly gave that up at the age of 15. At the time, football wasn't bringing in anything, so he considered quitting and just going to get a job working at the docks in his home city of Malmo. But his manager convinced him not to quit and keep on putting in the work on the pitch. And thank goodness he did, because Zlatan turned out to be one of the greatest goal scorers the game has ever seen. Speaking of the best goal scorers the game has ever seen, let's now talk about Cristiano Ronaldo. Not only is he the best goal scorer, but he's also one of the greatest footballers that has ever lived. But with the way his life started, we're sure he would never have dreamed that this could be his life. He was born into a very poor background on the island of Madeira in Portugal. His mother worked as a cook, and his father was a gardener and a kit man, and making ends meet was difficult. They were so poor that his mother very nearly aborted him because she already had 3 kids that she could barely take care of. And her husband being a chronic alcoholic did not help matters at all. But her doctor managed to convince her to have him, and she did. In the beginning though, she regretted it, because it felt like she only brought him to join the poverty. Finding food to eat and good clothes to wear was a real challenge. Cristiano was even sharing a room with all his 3 siblings. He managed to get into school, but Ronaldo got expelled for throwing a chair at his teacher. And then, a year later, he was diagnosed with tachycardia, a heart condition that threatened his footballing career before it even started. But he underwent surgery, and thankfully he was fine, going on to conquer the sport in ways we had never seen before. Ronaldo's early life was full of many ups and downs, but he managed to overcome them all to become a true icon of the sport and arguably the world's most famous person. Let us now tell you about a Premier League icon, Jamie Vardy. You know him as Jamie Vardy, but he was born Jamie Gill. His father walked out on him when he was just a baby, so he dropped his father's last name to cut ties completely with him. Instead, he decided to use his stepfather's last name. But that was just the beginning. Vardy has made a huge name for himself in Premier League football, but he was the latest of late bloomers. He'd picked up football very early on in his life, but it wasn't very profitable for him. At 25, he was still playing Sunday League football, while also working in a factory to support himself. Then, in 2012, Leicester City, who were in the Championship at the time, signed him for £1 million. But it wasn't happily ever after from there. His first season was so bad that Leicester fans criticised him heavily on social media. But Nigel Pearson and Craig Shakespeare, his managers at the time, convinced him to continue. And good thing they did, because the very next season, Jamie Vardy started to have a party. He scored 16 goals and helped Leicester gain promotion to the Premier League. Vardy made his Premier League debut at the age of 27, but he's gone on to achieve more than most strikers in the league's history. He led Leicester to the most unlikely Premier League success in 2016 and was named Player of the Season. He also led Leicester to the quarter-finals of the Champions League and helped them win their first ever FA Cup. Then, in 2020, at the age of 33, Vardy became the oldest player ever to win the Premier League Golden Boot. To cap it all off, after the club suffered relegation from the Premier League in 2023, Vardy went down with them. Other stars like Maddison and Tielemans left, but Vardy stayed and helped Leicester return to the top flight in 2024 at the age of 37. Despite making his Premier League debut at the age of 27, Vardy currently sits in the top 15 of the Premier League's all-time top scorers chart. Isn't that just so beautiful? Now, all these stories we've told you about in this video are surely very sad, beautiful, or mind-blowing. But trust us, there is none sadder or more mind-blowing than that of Jakub Blaszczykowski. Absolutely nothing can prepare you for the backstory of the Polish forward. Jakub was born in Poland into a fairly comfortable household. His life was pretty normal until one day in September 1996 when it changed forever. He was just 10 when he witnessed his father stab his mother to death. At that very moment, everything about his life changed completely. In his own words, his life took a 180-degree turn. He lost his mother and his dad went straight to prison, which meant that he and his brother had to be raised by their grandmother. That tragedy made Jakub lose interest in everything, including football. But his uncle, Jerzy Brzezak, who once captained the Poland national team, encouraged him to get back into football, which he did after 2 months. The striker has since talked about how he struggled with the trauma that came from witnessing this gruesome tragedy. He said he found it hard to talk about it in his early years, and he was just always asking himself, why? He said it felt like a rock fell on his head, and he had to just wake up and start life all over again. But he was eventually able to battle through the trauma and go on to have a brilliant career, winning league titles, playing in a Champions League final, and representing his country at the World Cup. Up until his retirement in 2023, Jakub often celebrated by pointing to the sky to pay homage to his mother. Unsurprisingly, Jakub did not speak to his dad after that incident until he died in 2012. But he made sure to pay his last respects to the man by attending his funeral. Now, which of these backstories surprised you the most? Tell us in the comments and let us know of any other crazy stories we didn't mention here. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more content.